It's nice to see you again. I hope you had a nice week so far. Please take a moment to just get settled in and turn on your cameras if you're able. Thank you so much for being on time. I'm seeing some cameras already. Fatima, hello. How are you? Zishan, hello. How are you? Elizabeth, hello. Yaroslav, hello. Lots of cameras. That's great. I'm very happy to see you all again. Before we really dive into the session, let me pass the floor over to Paula, who will briefly show you our online learning platform, which contains everything you need to participate in the course. So links to access the live sessions, information about sessions and facilitators, useful resources, which includes our online library, which contains resources on every topic taught by the Institute across departments, and the recordings of our sessions. The one of the previous session is not up yet, but it should be up today. So, Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abby. So yes, I'm going to show you the online learning platform next that you will be using throughout the course. You can access it from our website or from the email you received last Thursday where we shared the link with you. In that same email, you should also have received your username and password that will allow you to log in and access the course. So please write to me if you haven't received those or if you're having any issues accessing it. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you the platform itself. So I want to quickly draw your attention to the to the biography section first. So if you scroll down past the agenda, you will find the biographies. Um, Here, as you can see, we have made a map available for you where you can add your own biography. You'll see that you already have the Sanremo team biographies and the facilitators biographies. So you can check those out on your own time. We highly encourage everyone to use it and add your own biographies, and we thank those of you who have already done so, as this will help you to meet each other and network. You will find instructions on the platform on how to do it, on how to do it, and if in case you need any support, please let me know and I can assist you further. So now I'm going to continue to the next section I want to draw your attention to, which is the technical preparation. Um, this is a guide that provides you a detailed explanation of the tools that you will use. You can access it by clicking here on the blue title. And once you click on that, you'll be sent to another tab and click enter, which will send you to another window to complete the preparation. The technical preparation is divided into two main parts, the online learning platform and Zoom, as they're the two main tools that you will be using throughout this course. Um, this module will remain available for you to come back at any time in case you have specific questions throughout the course, but we highly encourage you to complete it as soon as possible to enhance your learning experience and make them use the platform the most that you can. Um, but there's two more things I want to show you. So the pre-course survey, thank you to all of those that have already completed it. But for those of you who haven't, I kindly ask you to take a few minutes to do so we can learn more about your expectations for the course, your background, and that way we can tailor the sessions to better fit your needs. And last but not least, I'm going to show you the feedback for this session, which you can access here on activity 2.3. I want to tell you that for every session on activity 0.3, you can access the feedback, answer the questions, and submit it. At the end of every session, I will also share the direct link in the chat. I also want to take this opportunity to kindly remind you that submitting the feedback is mandatory to receive the certificate at the end of the course. We use this feedback not only to improve the next session, but also to improve next editions of the course. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Of course, if you have any questions, I will share my email in the chat again. And without further ado, I pass the floor to Abby.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paula. So I really encourage all of you to get familiar with our platform and add your bio. It will really enhance your experience in the course. So now quickly, I would just like to explain, we have a little tradition in Sanremo where at the beginning of each session, we provide a brief summary of the previous session. So I will do it today, but starting from the next session, we will ask one of you to do the summary. So Paula, can you please share the summary slide? All right, thank you so much. So there are many challenges impacting refugee protection today, including the sheer number of displaced, which is 122.6 million people worldwide. Mixed movements pose a challenge with people of varying needs and profiles moving together, often along dangerous routes, and protracted refugee situations compound difficulties in achieving durable solutions. Climate change is a threat multiplier that can drive displacement and also impact refugee hosting countries. Finally, forcibly displaced persons are disproportionately hosted in low and middle income countries, and forcibly displaced persons often face misconceptions and hostility. However, we are seeing increased engagement of civil society, academia, the private sector, local governments, and refugees themselves. This is not to replace state efforts, but rather complement it. And this is where you come in as academics and trainers. Now, as academics and trainers, you can play a role in protection through teaching programs and courses on forced displacement, which can be entire degree programs, dedicated courses, or just including the topic of forced displacement in related courses, such as those on human rights law. These courses can be curricular or extracurricular, like a short course or summer school. Teaching about forced displacement can raise awareness and equip students and participants with knowledge and skills to address the complexities of forced displacement. Outside of the student audience, you can also have capacity building programs and interventions for professional audiences. These initiatives play a crucial role in strengthening decision-making processes and promoting compliance with international obligations regarding protection. You can also play a role through legal clinics, which provide essential legal assistance and support to forcibly displaced and stateless persons, helping them navigate complex legal systems, understand their rights, and access justice. Finally, evidence-based research and advocacy plays a crucial role in improving protection systems by identifying deficiencies, opportunities, and effective interventions and providing insights into gaps in policies and practices, which can inform policy recommendations and support informed decision-making. All of this was highlighted through the fantastic examples you all shared of your own work, demonstrating the many good practices around the world. So in a nutshell, this is what we will be asking you to do for next time. Paula will send you a template you can use, much like the one here, and we will ask you to share it with us ahead of time so she can share it during the session. We will ask you to keep your intervention short, around 3 minutes. So if anyone would like to already volunteer, will you share the summary with us? Yes, we will include the summary. Elizabeth, would you like to volunteer already for next time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I know, being the first one to volunteer is always the hardest, so thank you so much for breaking the ice. Paula will get in contact you to send you the template and explain a bit more. So without further ado, let me introduce our facilitator for today, Dr. Kara McBride. Kara serves as Senior Technical Education Specialist at World Learning, where she supports teacher training, curricular reform, and inclusive teaching and learning material creation. She has led the design of online teacher training courses that have been completed by more than 35,000 participants from over 120 countries. Before coming to World Learning, she was an associate professor of Spanish at St. Louis University in the United States, and her publications cover online task design, service learning, critical thinking, and the development of intercultural competence. So thank you, Kara, for being with us today. We are so pleased to have you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I am very excited to be here and to talk to you about a topic that is very interesting to me, which is the science of learning. So we will jump right into it. This is an overview of what we're going to do today. We'll start off, we're in the middle right now of the introductions. And then we will talk about what we are trying to accomplish today as a way of thinking about learning objectives. And then we'll cover first adult learning principles, and then more learning principles. And then there will be a short time where we'll have a few scenarios just to kind of see if we understand how the principles we've talked about fit with situations and teaching contexts. Then near the end of our session together, you will have a 15-minute breakout period. So we'll split up into groups so that you're able to discuss how you can apply these principles to the teaching situations that you work in. So I'm very happy to contribute in some way to the contributions that you make by teaching these courses and programs that were just mentioned. Throughout our time, there will be different times when I ask questions here and there, and so I would encourage you to be active and you know, by typing in the chat or you know, by speaking with your voice, whether with the camera or not. All right. So that's what this slide is for. But I wanted to start, fortunately, Abby shared with me a lot of information about what your jobs are, where you do teaching, and I took that into consideration as I worked on this session. She also told me that she asked you to fill out the survey about learning styles, VARC. And so Paola, if you would put into the chat now, there is a survey that we'd like to have you answer. I love seeing these answers come through. They're very often different from what you expect. All right, so I'm glad to see that we have at least one person, at least two people in each of the categories. And it's very interesting to me that we have 42% of the people, the most popular is balanced across more than one mode. That's so interesting because I've been in multiple groups where we've done this, and I've never seen a group where it was across more than one mode. So I'm excited. That's me too. And so I'm glad to see there are lots of people out there with similar characteristics. And as you probably saw on that website, they offer suggestions. So if you have a certain way that you best deal with information, then they have some strategies for you of how you can learn and study, taking advantage of the knowledge of your preferences there. So while you are participating in this session today and in other learning situations, it's very interesting to think about the extent to which the instructor is or isn't providing modalities that work with these different preferences. So, you know, today in this session, for example, there are visuals. I have pictures on most of the slides. For the auditory learners, of course, we're talking most of the time. For the read-write people, you have words on the screen, and you know, maybe I'll even ask you to write something at some point. Usually the kinesthetic learners kind of miss out, you know, in the world. in most schools, children are told to sit still and they're not encouraged to move around. And then it gets even worse when you're dealing with video conferencing, because we're sitting still, and that's usually pretty required in a video webinar or something like that. But it is true that finding ways to add different modalities to your learning can enhance your learning, and the brain likes movement too. So we'll come back to this theme of addressing different learning styles at different points during the session. So that's good to know a little bit more about all of you. And now, as we begin our 2 hours together, I want to think about what our objectives are, because you're always a little more likely to accomplish your objectives if you know what they are. So, for my session, I thought about, okay, what do I hope after 2 hours? What would be reasonable? And so, learning objectives in education, should be as precise as possible so that at the end you can see, yes, no, did we do that? So, one of the things that we traditionally do is to say when we want to accomplish these. So, by the end of the session, and I had two. One was that you would be able to name 3 or more factors that have a significant impact on learning. And the other is that you would be able to describe ways that you could adjust your instruction to increase learning in the participants in your programs. So now we have an idea of maybe what could happen, what I hope will happen. And then the next thing to ask is, how would we know if we accomplish this or not? So now we're going to do a little tiny exercise, and I'm actually going to get my phone and I'm going to time this. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes in just a moment. And what I'm going to ask you to do is think of what would it look like if we actually accomplished these learning objectives today. So, think in the immediate term, what today could we see that would tell us, yes, we were successful? And also, because ultimately we want sustainable results, what might we observe in a year from now if you really learned something today about the science of learning? So if you're a read-write kind of person, I would invite you to just do free writing for 2 whole minutes at a time. And maybe if you're a really verbal person, you can stay on mute and just talk out loud to yourself. Whatever way works for you, but let's literally take 2 minutes of just being silent. I'm starting it now, and just think, what would success look like today and in a year from now? So, okay, go. So that's about 1 minute. You still have 1 more minute to think of what would success look like. All right, so that was 2 minutes. And just before I ask some people to respond, I'll say that I finally found the chat while I had a moment to pause. And I saw the first couple questions that came in. And one person, Wilma, asked, what's the difference between multiple intelligence test and VARC? They're basically the same, they're getting at the same basic idea. And then another person asked whether learning objectives are set by teachers or by students. That's a great question. The official learning objectives are set by the educators, usually the teachers, but sometimes by someone else who's deciding for them. But then, of course, you personally have your own learning objectives as a learner. So those are important as well. So if you know, what you want to share today, you could say, well, in addition to what you laid out, Kara, I have some other objectives and this is what success would look like. That is, that would be very interesting too. So, would anyone like to share their thoughts? Right, yes, yeah, and you'll have a session that'll go into this more. Yeah, so Pamela.
Yeah, so I think that today I may be gaining more knowledge, and I will be reflecting on it during the whole day, maybe the whole week. And after a year, I will probably maybe adjusting my training styles, my facilitation skills to adult learning.
Great, and I like this mentioning reflecting.
Yeah.
That's a big part of education too, especially experiential learning, where, you know, not only do you have to have an experience, but learning really doesn't fully happen until you reflect on it and make connections, you know, with your own life and your own
Yes, and
situation.
since, for example, from my experience, we do trainings with adults and with policymakers and different kind of audience, and not all the styles and techniques will always succeed. So
Yeah. So hopefully we'll see a little bit about how to make that flexible, how to know how to change things. Fatima.
Thank you very much, Cara. I would just like to kind of maybe echo what Pamela has just said. And I definitely plan to reflect on it, but also to revise our current training strategy and to take a closer look at how we currently deliver, using the learnings from obviously today's session, but all the other sessions as well, and actually putting it into practice. That is that's the key, is between now and next year. Well, now in the next 6 months is the reviewing process, so using all the material and updating everything, and then assessing it in a year time to see how it all worked out and to see where the lessons learned really were. So yes, I absolutely second everything that Pam said.
Great. Yes. If you didn't change anything, then we wouldn't have been successful, right? But then also I really like what you said about how in a year's time after changing, then you reflect again and you say, well, you know, do I have evidence that people are learning more? So yes, and that is why you have a whole session on writing learning objectives, because if we just have a sense that things are working, but we don't have a real way of measuring that, then we might be wrong. So these 2 minutes that we took to be quiet and think is part of a very common teaching method that we use called think, pair, share, where there's 3 phases. The first one is think, where you literally just give people this sometimes awkward silence to just think on their own, because people take time to think things through. And also you have different personalities. So sometimes if you ask a question, there's that one person who always answers right away. And then the more thoughtful people are still, you know, and they never get around to raising their hand because they didn't get the 2 minutes to do their thing first. And then in a classroom, then you might do the pair where you put people in pairs and they talk about it. And only then afterwards you get to phase 3 where you have the group discussion, but people, you know, you need time to think. So one of the great teaching techniques is to be okay with silence for a little bit. All right. So now let's get into adult learning principles. This is all based on what a guy named Malcolm Knowles back in 1979 published, and he's still right, and we still talk all the time about his adult learning principles. Sometimes the word andragogy is associated with these thoughts because it's pedagogy. Ped is child, so andragogy is supposed to be for adult, but the term didn't really take off that much. And we have a handout, so if you are a phone person, you can use your phone, but Paola, if you would put into the chat the link for this handout as well, so that we can look at it in whatever device is convenient for you. I'm gonna look at it on my phone. And this is the first of 2 handouts that you will have during this session today. And I will move on. Hopefully you got that. All right, so you can divide the adult learning principles in certain numbers. Sometimes they're presented as 6 different ones. I've lumped them together in 4. I think that's enough. So basically, when you're dealing with adults, you don't want to treat them like children. That's the bottom line. And so one of the big insights into how to work with adults is that you need to give them input into what's happening. So Ulkan's question of whether learning adults are set by teachers or set by students is very, you know, connected to this issue of, well, adults have their lives and they have very clear ideas of what they're trying to accomplish. So for successful training, there needs to be some kind of input from the learners, the adult learners. So this can take the form of, you know, learning about the learners first. Abby shared with me a certain amount of information about all of you first, and that shaped what I decided to do. And then in terms of evaluation, every session they ask for feedback, they take that into account, that shapes what happens in the next session. So yeah, there needs to be input from the learners themselves. That's the first one. And then the learner's experience must be the foundation for what is going on. So this takes essentially 2 forms. On the one hand, I just need to recognize that you are experts already in what you do. And what we talk about just won't be that effective if I don't recognize that fact about you. And at the same time, you need experience. You need to actually connect what we're talking about with your life. And you need to be able to, yeah, reflect on your own jobs while we're doing this session. And so, yeah, your lived experience needs to be connected. It can't just be some kind of theory out there that is disconnected from you. Then the next one, the bluish one, relevance and impact. You know, so as I have on the handout, the adult learners can see that the learning is relevant to them and will have an impact in their lives. And yeah, again, you know, adults are busy people, they have things to do. And so if this doesn't seem relevant to you, you will start losing interest immediately. And it can't just be some sort of vaguely interesting facts about learning. You have to really feel like, yes, in a year from now, this can continue helping me make better training sessions. Finally, and all of these are really quite connected to each other, as you can see, the information shared and activities done are aimed at problem solving. So relevant, interesting, but you know, that adults, what is it to be an adult? We have problems. That's what we do. And so we want to solve them. That's how our lives go. And so when we're doing training, we are motivated by having this sense of, yes, this can really help me solve the problems that I have. So, I have here on the left side of the screen is a fact sheet about this session, this whole course that you're taking right now. And it's quite a nice fact sheet. And so I thought I would zoom in here on what is on the right hand of the screen or of the fact sheet. And then I made it bigger on the right. So that has the methodology. And in their fact sheet, it says that some of the methodology will be with keynote speakers, with simulations, case studies. Let's move that over. Peer-to-peer exchanges of best practices, personal projects, collective activities, and individual assignments. So as I see it, these are great methodologies to use with adults. And so now that we're thinking about adult learning theory, let's put them together, the 4 principles there, and then these kinds of methodologies. And I'd like to ask you, can you take one of these methodologies and then match it with one of the adult learning principles to explain why that methodology should be effective with adults? Yes, Elizabeth.
Maybe let's take simulations and case studies, and that would go well with problem-centered approach. As if you have real life case study, for instance, or a simulation-based training, I think it shows you the relevance to tailor it to the actual problem.
Exactly. Yeah, so a case study makes it relevant and it is oriented, the cases are almost always about problems of some kind. So it touches on that, those two. And really, you know, all of these learning principles tend to be quite interconnected. We could also say, you know, if we were to all sit around and look at a case study, you would bring to the table your experience and you would be able to say, you know, I had a case like this recently. This is what I did. This is what I saw. Pamela.
Yes, the peer-to-peer exchanges of best practices can be linked also to learners when they give input into plans, and they will be sharing their experiences and personal examples.
Yep. Exactly. And Wilma. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Personal projects, I think they cut across most of the adult principles there, because they provide the opportunity to give input, and also they share experiences. You draw from your experiences and others, and you have to highlight some relevance and impact of what you are. So from the analysis, and also problem centered, it means you're trying to solve a certain problem, and therefore it becomes relevant in that sense. So I think it cuts across.
Agreed. And personal projects are a great way of allowing participants to make that connection to their own experience in ways that you as an instructor can't foresee. And in general, you know, adults and children really prefer to have a sense that they have some choice in the matter. So when they're able to apply something to a personal situation, that usually helps with motivation as well. Michael.
Yeah, hi. This is actually kind of a tangential question that comes to mind. You've mentioned several times these are, theories and techniques for adult learning. At what point is a person an adult? In other words, at what point are these relevant? Or at what point do they cease to be relevant? University students, high school students, like roughly where does the literature or the theory draw the line and say, this is no longer
Interesting
necessarily the
question.
best approach?
I really find that at what point somebody is more this way it's a huge amount to do with culture. So a lot of it has to do with, has that person in the past already had the role of an adult, been the person making the decisions, not having to listen to some authority figure, right? So from one culture to another, it will really vary. I used to teach at the university, and I felt that the generation I was teaching was about 3 years younger than my own generation had been when we were that age. And so, maybe not 18, but it will, and it's also, of course, is one of those things where not everyone is the same. So you'll have certain personality types. But once we get clearly into the adult age, you want to make sure that these are more followed, I think, is the bottom line. All right, so that is basically the adult learning principles in a nutshell. In the organization that I work for, we work by, applying for grants. And so a lot of times in the call for proposals, it will say must be aligned with adult learning theory. And so the kinds of things that have been offered just now as explanations for why those methodologies are just the kinds of things that you say when you want to prove that your training will be aligned with adult learning principles. So now for learning, perhaps the most important thing is that you have to pay attention. This is the sort of the very foundation of what makes for good teaching. And so, as we were talking through some of these adult learning principles, I mentioned motivation more than once, and that is one of the most central issues when setting up an educational activity, is that if your participants stop being motivated, they will stop paying attention. Their minds will wander, they'll read their phone. And so motivation needs to be attended to. And just like we were saying, what exactly is an adult? Well, that can even that can vary from culture to culture, group to group. And what will motivate your learners, that will vary hugely from group to group, even individual to individual. So educators really need to have some kind of sense of their learners in order to create something that will keep the participants motivated. And then secondly, it really requires active participation. Even the most interested person, if they're just sitting passively and doing nothing during a long period of time, they start losing attention. They start fading a little bit. So one of the very first things that you need to know about learning is that you need to pay attention. Oh. And that brings us to our second handout. Here's the QR code, and then Paola will put in the chat the link for this. And you will see that this handout has the same information as the last one, but then a lot more. And I wanted to mention, these are Google documents. And they're view only in the way that you're being given the document, but you might want to make a copy for yourself. And then you could edit it and write in your notes or whatever. So I'm going to go to the next screen. Hopefully everyone got that if they want. Actually, I didn't get it. So let me go ahead and make sure I have this in case I want to look. So, but yeah, I'll pause here. My number one, so we have 11 more principles that we'll go through together today. And my number one principle is that to learn, you must pay attention. So then I gave you the link for a handout that has all the rest of the notes. And as I said, it starts with exactly the same information that was on the other one, but then you scroll down and you'll see this table. And next to each principle, there are a couple lines to help you remember what it means. So would anyone like to guess why I decided to wait until now to give you all of the notes? Yes, Sophia.
I guess some of us would have started going through them and not paid attention to you speaking.
Exactly. And you must pay attention to learn. So it's funny in teaching, a lot of the success can really depend on tiny little details. So this is the number one learning principle. If you're not paying attention, you're not learning. And so you just need to pay attention. And so the teacher needs to be thinking about these small little logistical issues sometimes. If I'm giving you the handout and if it's got these cool pictures or interesting words in bold, am I listening to you? No, I'm not. Yeah. And so if I were in a room with you, I usually give the handout and then I'm a little slow to start talking again because I know at the very beginning, people just aren't paying that much attention to me. So I thought I would just wait a little bit, you know, for you to get that later. Our second learning principle, and as I said, they're all very interrelated, is that we just don't have that many mental resources. We can only think of so many things at once. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that we really only think of one thing at a time. When we think we're multitasking, it's really that a few milliseconds on this, then you switch to something else, and a few milliseconds on that, and you just cycle through things. You don't actually have many things in your mind at once. So the computer metaphor is a very good one. Computers don't freeze as much now as they used to. This used to be a better metaphor. But, you know, on a small computer, if you have too many windows open, too many applications running, then it will start slowing down and it won't function as well. So as instructors, we really need to be aware of the fact that people can't do too many things at once. And so if they're looking at the handout, then they're not listening to you. If they're standing up and moving around the room to find their partner, they're not listening to you. So I come from the tradition originally of being a language teacher. And, you know, if I'm having my students think about grammar, I can't really also have them pay a lot of attention to pronunciation. So exactly how that translates for your field, I'm not sure, but you know, if you're thinking about the specifics of one area, then you can't also bring in too many other things at once. Now, Now we're going to take a bit of a detour. And if you look at the handout, it goes from 1 to 2 to 2.5. And this is a bit of a detour, all connected to this principle number 2, our brain power is limited. This has become an increasingly important fact because the way we use language is changing very, very dramatically, mostly due to technology. So during my career as an educator, I have watched texts get smaller and smaller. Twitter, now called X, came into being in 2006. We were all amazed that anyone would write only 140 characters at the beginning, and now it's just normal. What the texts that people are exposed to are shorter and shorter. And for you who deal with law, which is long texts a lot of times with complicated language, that is a problem. That is a major issue that you have to deal with because the average person cannot hold that many words in their head anymore. It's just not the way people are anymore. I've got this picture of like WhatsApp or something with the voice because now people don't write as much, they don't read as much, they're using their voice more. So what does that mean as an educator? It means that I need to shorten my messages. I need to consider adding audio sometimes. If I'm going to have a video, even a video beyond 5 minutes, you've lost them. Long videos just won't fly. Then in the top right, I have an infographic because people, in addition to reading less, now we're using more pictures. And we're communicating more through emojis and through infographics. If you add an infographic into your handout, it suddenly makes more sense to people. People have become less read-write and have become more visual over time, just as general population. And then, as if all of that weren't weird enough, now we've got AI. And so someone can write just a few words. It may not even make sense, but AI creates long texts if necessary. So this is going to cause a trend of people being able to read and write carefully and pay attention, even less. We're seeing a lot of copy paste happening in all educational situations. And so as you design materials, you want to always keep these facts in mind. There's nothing we can do about it. We just need to support learners as much as we can. So that brings us to, we're still on our tangent of 2.5, readability. How do you make things readable? Because you have words you need to share and people need to read those words. So then how are you going to make it easier for them? So there's a whole sort of field of what makes things more readable, and basically between text A on the left and text B on the right, which one's more readable? The answer is B, right? And why is that? So first of all, walls of text, no, just don't do it. Find a way to make the paragraphs smaller, add white space, just no. And now back to our flyer, which I like so much. And no, you're not supposed to be able to see this clearly. It's blurred on purpose. But my question is, just sort of looking vaguely at this, where do your eyes go on this page?
The pictures.
The pictures. Exactly. I like the numbers too. My eyes go to the numbers and the little shapes and so forth. That's where my eyes are drawn. And that, my friends, is exactly how everybody reads. So they do these really great studies with eye trackers where the person wears this kind of thing and then it sees where their eyes go. And they've studied both, printed text and also how people read online. And then these dots and colors show you where their eyes are going. So what are we seeing? We're seeing that people look at the pictures and people read the things at the beginning. and then not so much. That's just the way it is. So if there is something important at the bottom of the page, you need to move it. So now we're looking at this flyer, and I'm just going to call out some of the things that are great about the design of this flyer. By the way, it had nothing to do with the design of this flyer. I just liked it. So one of the ways of making something readable is to break up the text with headings and subheadings. So we have this nice border at the top. We have little lines dividing up the page, words that are bigger that help us know what is this section about and why would I want to read it. Key points are highlighted by using different fonts. It could be, make it in bold, or change the color, or make something bigger. Anything to set text apart so that you're guiding the reader and you're saying, look over here because this is the section of the text that gives you this information. People need those guides. White space. Again, we don't want a wall of text. You need to break up the text. Just, again, long paragraphs really put people off these days. So just shorten your paragraphs. Just put a break somewhere. So paragraphs aren't too long, and then appropriate font size. You wouldn't want it too big either. So with these very simple tricks, you can make it much more likely that people will be reading more of what you had hoped that they would read. Okay, now we're moving back. That was the end of our detour on 2.5. And now we're moving to a new principle. And this is number 3, social constructivism. It's a whole set of theories that was started primarily associated with Vygotsky. Yeah, so I'm reading the chat. So, and the comment that Wilma made, perhaps to add to your point on languages, on the issue of accessibility and inclusivity, we rarely take into account this aspect in our learning and training activities. Hooray, thank you, yes. And accessibility has a lot to do with readability, right? So, and that takes many forms. If you're just sitting in a room and you have a bunch of old people, don't make the font too small. Nobody after 40 can read that clearly. Or, if you're in the front of a room, write big enough on the board so that people at the back of the room can see. If you share a PDF, make sure that it can be read by, it's not an image. Make sure that it has actual letters so that if someone's using a special program to read it to them, that can work, or they can make it bigger if necessary, and so on. So great comment there. All right, so social constructivism is something, that was started around the 1800s. People started talking about this at the end of the 1800s. And now neuroscience is really supporting it in very interesting ways. Basically, it says that knowledge is constructed through interaction with others. And that interaction, usually is through talking, but that's not the only way it can happen. So here's my little scenario. You have 3 people and they're standing around a lamp. And then they might talk, they might say something about the lamp. And one of them is thinking about, well, it's a cloudy day, it's not very bright, so let's turn on the lamp. And another one is thinking more about the type of color of light. Is it a blue light or a warm light? And then maybe the third person is thinking about the electricity that needs to power the lamp. And through this conversation, then you share ideas, you share perspectives, and you come to understand the concept more. And basically, learning happens through this linguistic give and take, but not only language. Again, if you're interacting together and manipulating a puzzle or manipulating a robot or something, then learning is also happening there. But, you know, after that conversation, you will have a shared understanding, but you will also, each person will have a somewhat different take on exactly what happened. And that's another part of how learning works, is that even though we all have in our minds a concept, and I have the concept, and you have the concept, and she has the concept, the exact form of the concept is likely to be slightly different in my mind than in your mind. Now, a word about why it's called social constructivism. The social, we can see it's because basically it just looks like social interaction. What are the activities that bring about learning? And the constructivism is that, you know, learning is not something I can just give you. I can't just like receive learning and now I know. Now I understand. No, I have to work at it. I have to listen to what's going on, and I have to construct in my own mind, actively construct an understanding. So I have to be interacting, I have to be active, I have to put forth some effort. And so that is what social constructivism is. Interaction, active activities will lead to learning. All right, and again, connected to that is principle number 4, that variation is the norm, right? So on our last slide, we just saw that after this conversation about the lamp, while we all understand lamps now, and more broadly, we will ultimately have a slightly different concept of exactly what we're talking about with lamps. Everyone learns in a somewhat different way. Everyone processes information in a somewhat different way. And that, the more and more and more that we study how the human mind works, the more we're realizing how true that is. Brains are just different. So these walnuts are supposed to be brains, right? They're all slightly different. And as we saw at the beginning of our session this morning, even, you know, some of us are more visually oriented, some of us are more kinesthetically oriented, etc. And so what does that mean for us as educators? It means that not the same explanation is going to make sense to everybody. It means that it's good if you can present the information in more than one way. A video sometimes, a discussion sometimes, a graph or a table sometimes. And it also means that the more that you know your students, the more that you'll understand what works for them and what they respond to well. All right. Principle number 5 has a couple different names. One is mental models, or sometimes these are called schemes, or the fancy plural in English is schemata. And so what do we have on the screen here? What is this? What is this a picture of? Just a guess. What do you think?
Listeners, learners.
Learners, classroom. Yep. And what are some of the cues that told you that was true?
They are all focused to one direction and listening or paying attention at least.
Exactly. It's that simple. So mental models is this concept in psychology that those concepts that we have in our heads, everything we know, every concept we have some kind of model in our heads of how that works. And those models, you know, may stay pretty stable over time. I have an idea of what tables are about. They have 4 legs usually, and so on and so forth. But they can also shift. So we've got mental models. Each one of us has a mental model of what a classroom is like, for example. So here there are these people sitting here. They're all, you know, kind of sitting in the same kind of way. And I'm pretty sure that is the student. This is my little symbol for student. And what else is in my mental model of a classroom? Well, one of the main things is that there's going to be some kind of instructor. I don't even see the instructor in this photo, but I know where the instructor is, right? The instructor is in the direction they're all looking at, right? I also think that there's usually some kind of blackboard or chalkboard or whiteboard. I don't see that either, but I'm pretty sure there is one behind the instructor. I'm pretty sure there is. I also think that usually they're gonna have notes or something. For the most part, I don't see people with notes on their desk, but if this woman has something on her desk, I think that's probably her notes. I usually think there's a textbook too. I'm not seeing that. But that's my mental model. Not all classrooms are the same, but my mental model fits pretty much every classroom I ever look at. Here's another classroom. Oh, there he is. I know, once again, I know this is the teacher, right? And here's my blackboard. And so why am I talking about this? What does this do? It's because we have mental models of how things work. And when we encounter something new, then having a mental model will allow us to operate quickly. If you walk into this room, you know who the teacher is. You don't have to figure that out. And if you are a student, you'll instantly know where you are supposed to sit down because, yeah, you have also in your mental model that these are the desks and that's where the students sit. As educators, there's lots of things that we can do to take advantage of mental models. One is if we know that we share a mental model in common, then we can just rely on people knowing that's the instructor, you sit over here. If I want to do a radical new kind of activity in my class, and I'm working with students who have never had an active discussion-based class, though, and I want them to now participate in a class that doesn't fit their current mental model of how school works, there will be some kind of conflict. So when you introduce new activities to learners, it may be the best idea ever about how to do an activity, but you'll also need to work in the time of helping them understand how it works and maybe why they would want to participate in that as well. So we're going to continue with the mental models a little bit. This is connected with lots and lots of things, lots of other facts. So we'll see in the next one. But anyway, can you think of something else that you have a mental model of? Yes, Fatima. Where did you go?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I was just going to ask the question of, does it have to relate to educational and classrooms, or can it be like, for example, a shopping center, a train?
Anything.
Station? Okay. So then I would say those things, because no matter where you're traveling to, you feel like you would understand where you're at. So if you go to a shopping center in Spain or in England, it will be the same thing. If you go to a train station in Berlin or Paris, it's the same concept. That is my understanding of what you've just said.
Great, that's fabulous. It's a great example too of, I like how you're saying when you travel, because a lot of times when you go to another country, you may not speak the language that's spoken there too, but you still know how to get into the train, right? So this can also help us as educators, because if we have certain routines that we always do with our learners, then we can save time. We don't have to explain all the details. Right? So on a train, typically people don't have to explain. There's going to be some person taking your ticket. You look for that. And so routines can be very much of a time saver as well. Now, where here I said, what parts do they contain and how do the parts relate to each other? That's another thing that as you're introducing new complex concepts to people, you want to help them understand the different parts and how they work together. The teacher's over here, the students are over here. The train conductor's here, you walk through that door. And saying that explicitly, how the pieces fit together, will help people construct that mental model in their minds. And so metaphors are an amazing way to communicate and to help people grasp a new concept. So people use metaphors by taking advantage of mental models. So for example, we all have an idea of what a journey is like. So if I want to help you understand that learning isn't instantaneous, it takes a while, you have to, go here and there, then I could use that metaphor to help you, kind of get more insight into how learning works. Number 6. You need to connect new learning to learners' prior knowledge. So, and this is connected to mental models, right? So, if I tell you something completely new and completely abstract, it will be very difficult for you to grasp, and it will be very difficult for you to learn. But if I connect this new idea to something that's familiar to you, then you have something to hold on to. So good instruction will begin with something that's known and then move out further and further into new material. I like the word association that is in the chat there. Yes. And in fact, in the brain, that is kind of what's going on. You've got this information here, you get this new information, but because there's a connection, then yeah, thinking starts happening, connections start being made, and understanding happens. And I kind of think of it as a place to hang a thought. If you have a completely new idea out of nowhere, there's nothing for it to connect to in the mind. But if you connect it to something that's familiar, an anecdote, a metaphor, something like that, it helps with learning. All right, number 7 is that learning happens step by step, going from the familiar to the unfamiliar. So you can see these principles are all kind of connected to each other. So, and I've got more metaphors here, right? I've got stepping across stones or a bridge. So what am I talking about? Let's say you're trying to teach a law clerk about immigration law. And on day 1, metaphorically, they are on the first step there, the first stone. And they cannot leap across the river instantly. Your end goal is all the way on the other side of the river. You want them to be able to give good legal advice. But you can't just get them there instantly. So if you're going to teach them how to get there, you need to do little steps to get there. You need to break down the information in small pieces. So I really like this picture on the right of, you know, if you break things down in small goals, small steps, then it's doable. And if you try to leap from the completely unfamiliar to the completely familiar, it's too much. People just can't make that big of a mental leap. All right. So number 8, recalling a memory is like walking a path. You keep the path clear. So, you know, if you have experience walking on a dirt path, you know that if people walk on it every day, it will be clear. And if people almost never go that way, it will become overgrown, and then it will become harder to walk there. Same thing with the mind. The more that you recall a certain piece of information, the easier it is to recall. That's why if you speak a foreign language and then you stop speaking it for a few years, it's harder to remember so many, it's harder to remember those words that you haven't used in a while. And so exactly like Michael just put in the chat, yes, basically the more you repeat information, the easier it is to recall and the easier it is to use in problem solving. So if you want someone to know something, repetition is good. Principle number 9, to improve a skill, you practice that skill. So both the brain and the body need to exercise and practice. And again, we're talking about repetition. If you want to be the best best cyclist, if you want to be very fast, you need to ride a bike. Swimming isn't going to get you there. You need to practice that skill. That exact skill that you're trying to get good at is what you need to practice. And so, yeah, doing something too theoretical will not make you very good at doing the practical application. You need to practice the practical application. And on the other hand, you get tired. So, you know, you want to practice a lot, but if you've been practicing a skill too much in a short amount of time, then your performance goes down. For example, they say if you have to make a lot of decisions in one day, by the end of the day, it's harder for you to make a decision. So the brain works surprisingly more like the body, I think, than we used to believe. All right, now we're moving on to number 10, and here is a little image that will probably be pretty familiar to a lot of you, the Pavlov's dog experiment. Do you know that one? Where you had a dog, the experiment was, there was a dog, the scientist Pavlov exposed the dog to meat and the dog would salivate. And then the experimenter would ring a bell. And repetition kept doing those two stimuli together. And eventually what happens is that in this last, you know, the last panel at the bottom, it becomes the case that the experimenter can just ring the bell and the dog salivates, even if there's no meat there. Now, why are we talking about that? Because neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons are the cells in your brain, and our brains work so that if two stimuli are always associated with each other, then eventually they become automatically associated with each other. Now, how does that work? Why do we care as educators? Well, here's an example. Oh, by the way, this is a neuron. It's a picture of a neuron. If I see these shapes that make the letter B, 2 letter O's, and a K, what instantly happens to me is I imagine a book. It's absolutely automatic, and I couldn't stop it if I wanted to. So there are good sides to this and there are bad sides to it. The good side is that if we want people to be efficient in a task, we just constantly associate two things together. So for example, you know, if I see a student who's kind of not paying attention anymore in my class, I instantly know that I need to change something so that I get their attention back. So that's on the good side. You can associate things together and behavior becomes automatic. On the bad side, certain negative things that happen to us when they're associated with something, then again, we can't help ourselves. Certain reactions are automatic and we will have a negative reaction. So, and that has to do with our final principle here. That emotions are always part of things. So let's say you're working with a refugee who had been in a war zone, and that person was exposed to explosions, and the explosions threatened their lives. Then it could be that when that person hears loud sounds, they go into a kind of panic. That's a problem for learning. It's a problem for emotions and lots of things, but it's a problem for learning too, because our brain has this part here in the front that does the hard thinking, the critical thinking, the, you know, reasoning things out. And then at the base of our skull, we have an older part of our brain that is all about survival. And so if your student gets triggered because they've heard a loud explosion, their brain instantly goes into panic because their brain wants to survive. And so you need to spend some time pausing before that person will be able to pay attention to you again. You need to do something to calm them down. And so, yeah, and there's this expression in American English that we use more and more, something can be triggering. So a loud sound can automatically cause panic in someone who's been in a war zone, as automatically as I think of a book when I see the word book. Timothy.
Hi, I think this is really interesting. So beyond the situation of the refugee or the migrant who may find themselves coming from a place of trauma, if I'm teaching a course like international human rights, but it presupposes that a student had a background in international law, and they had a terrible experience with international law, how do I, and I understand this, recognizing that we need to slow it down, how do I break that dislike? And of course, they may have been disliked because the lecturer taught it quickly or was difficult or was demanding. How do I get
I love
them?
your example. That's such a great example. Yes,
For
exactly.
me, for me.
You have these associations and you cannot stop them. Well, the only way to stop this sort of automatic primitive brain survival response is to then engage critical thinking, which requires calm talking about things and explicitly saying, if where possible, explicitly saying, you know, you probably have terrible associations with this. That is something else. Now we're here and let's see how we can make this different. And you, learner, if you can think of something to help make that separation, let me know. But it would need to take, yeah, just sort of reasoned conversation and some time. Did I see another hand? I think it came and went. All right. So we're doing okay. Those were our adult learning principles plus 11 more. So now let's see how you're doing. And speaking of terrible associations, Timothy, many people, as soon as you say, I'm going to quiz you, they're like, ah, no. So what could I do? I could, over time, let my learners know that, no, you're not going to be punished if you don't know the answer. This is just my way of seeing whether or not it's been clear enough. Yeah, there's no punishment involved. And for me to explicitly say that, I can anticipate worries and I can address them right away to address that thing you were talking about, Timothy. So, okay, we have a couple scenarios. Here's one scenario. It's new employee orientation, and the guy who's doing the teaching, his name is Jahangir, and he's got his new staff. They practice what they need to do, and they learn. That's the scenario. So what I'm going to do is show you 3 of the principles. And what you will do is you'll choose which of these best explains why they learned. And in every single one of these scenarios, more than one answer is possible. But what do you think? What explains this? Number 1, you have to pay attention in order to learn. Number 5, we use mental models to interpret new situations, objects, tasks, etc. Or number 9, to improve a skill, you practice that skill. I'm seeing in the chat 2 votes for number 9, 3 votes. Yes, that's the one that I think explains it. And it sure sounds very, very simple. But that's how it works. To improve a skill, you practice the skill. I see lots of votes for both number 1 and number 9, and that is true too. If the people in the new employee orientation weren't paying attention and they were looking at their cell phone the whole time, they wouldn't learn, or they wouldn't learn as much. And we could sit around and argue for number 5 too, by the way, but we'll move on. All right, here's another one. We're still with Jahangir. He's still orienting his new employees, and one of his new employees is this woman named Banu. And she doesn't get it at first, but then Jahangir's like, oh, it's just like your phone. And then that metaphor, you know, kind of works for her. She's like, oh, the paper system's like the phone system, and aha, now she understands. So what's going on there? Is it that number 2, mental resources are limited? Is it number 5, you need to connect to prior knowledge in order to teach something? Or number 8, repetition helps with learning? Which one explains this the most in your minds? I've got all these new answers. Number 5, number 5, number 5, connect to prior knowledge. Yes. I agree. That's the one that most I was thinking of when I made this example. That she already knows how her phone works. And so if you can draw some parallels there, now she can kind of follow what you're saying a little better. Okay, we're still with Jahangir. And another person in his group. And what is this situation? This is that the newest staff member did not understand the manual. So there was some kind of manual that explained everything, this big, long, boring book, right? He didn't understand, but then he talked to Banu, and ta-da, he understood after having that conversation. So problem solved. What explains this? Is it number 1, to learn, you must pay attention? Is it number 3, people learn through interaction with others? Or is it number 10, neurons that fire together, wire together? 3, 3, 3, 1 and 3, 1 and 3. Yes, yes, yes. I agree with all of you. So number 3 is the one I was most intending. That, you know, here Banu and this other guy are sitting around talking, and now, you know, through conversation, it finally makes sense because he's, you know, one of these young people who can't read long texts or something. So that's part of it, is just that interaction almost always makes things easier to follow. But as a lot of you pointed out, number 1 is also applicable. It's always applicable. You must pay attention to learn. Okay. We could also say that number 4 was part of what was going on here. Different people learn in different ways. So Banu was okay with the manual, but she needed that metaphor to make it all fall into place. But yeah, you're gonna have a staff. One of them needs to talk about phones to understand. The other one needs to just talk to a classmate for a while because the way the instructor is explaining it is just not working for him. Different people learn in different ways. Oh, and now we have yet another person. This guy, he still didn't get it until he saw a flow chart. That's what this is. And so again, you know, maybe different ways of representing information is how, you know, you'll finally allow that connection to be made for somebody. All right, and now here's our last scenario. Wilma, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking with number 10, if we look at the medical field, an equation of a manual that has technique is also like a, you know, it's like a trigger. If you have to do that operation successfully, you must know the techniques in the manual. I don't know how that can be applied in other fields. Like it's a trigger. If you don't know a technique that's in a given manual, then that's it, or you don't know a certain procedure. So I don't know how you can relate that, or if all this just applies to one particular field and how that can be interpreted in other fields. That's what I'm kind of thinking as you kind of show us how can we apply all this in various fields where different requirements actually can be used and are triggered by all this. And looking at number 10 specifically. Thank you.
So I feel like I don't fully understand what your question is. Are you saying like, in some fields, there's one and only one methodology that is appropriate for something, but in your field, there's maybe multiple ways of approaching a problem? Is that what you're getting at, or?
Somewhat, yeah. Because I mean, in certain instances, you must learn the manual to actually get to know the technique and perform. And I use the medical field as an example, right? So in the way we are doing the discussion right now, I'm wondering how that can be fitted using the manual that you've given us the example. Can we just say number 3 it is that, or we can also say number 10 in certain, or we are ruling out, okay, too many questions. We are ruling out number 10 just based on the question. I was trying to go further beyond the question and actually see how number 10 can be applicable, especially when it comes to manual and the outputs expected, right? And that learning component.
Question. Okay, yeah, so in this particular situation, we've got this manual that is just somehow difficult to understand. And so different people have come to understand what is the information that they need to know. And where number 10 is fitting into this situation, the answer is in many different ways. So one thing that might be occurring in this situation is that this newest staff member who did not really understand the manual may just have so many associations with long texts that that's part of what's getting in the way of him learning what it says. And principle number 10 is telling us that when two things are associated, when they occur together, then they are thought about together in the mind. And so in the case of a practitioner who needs to be able to think of more than one way of solving a problem, who needs to have divergent thinking, they will have certain associations. Oh, when you have this problem, here's the solution. And they will tend to always think in that direction. And that might make them slow to consider other options, other solutions. And so as an educator, what you could do to train that person to think more divergently would be to say, yes, the solution that you came up with works in these ways, but it might not be the best one, and to just sort of very consciously and explicitly lead them through considering other options. So I hope that's helpful. And in a very short amount of time, we'll also have the breakout rooms where we can kind of hash this out a little bit more, and then we'll have a group discussion at the end. So I'm just going to go ahead with the last one. Here we have the situation of some balloons, and then bang, one of them gets popped, and there was a fun party, but then one of the staff members became very upset after hearing a balloon pop. And which of the principles do you associate with this scenario? Is it variation is the norm, neurons that fire together, wire together, or panic stops critical thinking? I see more than one answer, and I agree. Actually, I can easily argue for all three of these. The one that seems the most popular so far, neurons that fire together, wire together. So this person, loud noise, and then instantly they get upset. So that's the association, neurons that fire together, wire together. But also, this person is probably now in panic mode, which panic mode can look very calm in a lot of people, but it's still panic. And so at this point, our staff member is now not really acting very rationally, and this person can't help it, and they may not even be aware of it. And then, of course, this is also a case of variation is the norm, because not everyone has that association, just some people. All right, so here are my mini takeaways from the whole group of things. And I see your hand, and I'll get to you in a moment. So very broadly, in terms of education, we need the activities to be relevant to the learners. Learners need to be active as they are attempting to learn new things, and they need to be paying attention. So your hand went down, Elias. Did you want to say something or ask?
Yeah,
anything?
just a quick question. What about using humor?
Absolutely. Yeah, humor is very much one of the best tools for bringing someone away from negative thoughts and, allowing them to see a situation in a new way. And these automatic responses, they're automatic, so they're not being thought about consciously. So whatever you can do to bring them into a conversation and get them to talk through what's going on, that will bring them back to calm faster. And humor is one of the most effective tools for that in the world. Yes. All right, Pamela.
I wanted to add that we learn better when we are happy, and the humor makes us happy.
Exactly. So yeah, especially us language teachers, we tend to do a lot of games in the class and everything. And sometimes it sort of feels so sort of, just la la la, like you're just playing. And but yeah, if you're happy, you're paying attention. If you're happy, it seems relevant to you. If you're happy, you're not panicking, and so you can think more rationally. Magdalena.
Two things. With regards to humor, I would just note that maybe we should be careful, because we don't know yet the background of the people that are listening to us. So something that is funny to us might be offensive to the others.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That's a very good.
Higher.
Yeah. So, yes, humor, what's funny to some groups is absolutely not funny to others. All right, we'll take one more from Wilma.
Okay, I will just.
Oh, sorry, Magdalena. No, I was just about to say the same thing with Magdalena, with the point of knowing your audience, Solana, is very key. And even though sometimes there are certain intricate personal details that you might not know, but when you come to the sessions of classroom, trying to know your learner by them introducing themselves or just asking certain questions that can guide you is very key. Then you get to know, and that kind of sets out the tone. And there are questions, I think, a lot out there that we can use just to kind of maybe a warm-up session before the session or your class to kind of ask who they are or what they like and things that set them off that can also support in the learning as well. Thank you.
Yes, I really agree with you completely, and I think actually I'll add to this then I'll add a fourth main takeaway that effective instruction does require knowing one's students or learners. So there's lots to say, and that's why we have a 15-minute breakout room. So in just a moment, you're going to be put in, I think, one of 3 or 4 breakout rooms. And what are you going to talk about? Broadly, what I would like you to talk about is how you can apply these principles to help your learners learn. So to do that, you know, you might bring up a specific problem that you've encountered in instruction, and then see what others think about, you know, what principles you could learn, you could apply, and then what you would actually do. What would implementing the principle look like? You know, so you could start from the problem, or you could start from the principle, and you could just kind of go down the line of different principles on the handout and discuss those. So we'll put you into rooms for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and have a final discussion at the end. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. That was too short for me. I don't know about you, but I would love to continue. Anyway, I'm sure you had lots of interesting conversations and so on. And while I would like to hear all of it, maybe if there's especially any questions or, yeah, things that you really wanted to get clarified, that might be the best place to start. Yes, Timothy.
So this does not come out of a conversation we had in our group, just a separate conversation, a question I have. Years ago, I was told by a senior lecturer that the more we teach, the better we are and the more familiar we are with the material. The consequence of that could sometimes be that we think that the students are slower. As years go by, we get better. So we can cover a vast amount of material in a shorter space of time. And we sometimes say years ago, students got it faster, now they're not. But really, the fact is we are more familiar with it. How do I build in that reality into my expectations in the classroom, particularly after you've done it for a while?
That is such a wonderful, yeah, it's a really great piece of advice, and I fully agree. So how do you stay, you know, honestly, I do enjoy taking classes on a regular basis just to remember what it's like to be a student and not understand things. That's huge in itself. Go back to a foreign language class and feel silly, you know, that's a great experience. And, you know, maybe just the sort of conscious reminding yourself of it. I do notice that a lot of people, they can't remember what it was like to struggle with the material. That's too bad. If you can tap into your previous self who also found it difficult and just remind yourself of that. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that so that everyone can start reminding themselves of, yeah, and lower your expectations. In the group I was in, this breakout room I was in, someone said, okay, you said that people have short attention spans, but don't we want to build them? And the answer is yes. If we had enough time to help the people build their attention spans and deal more easily with long texts, we would do that. But if we don't have that opportunity, we just need to meet the learner where they are, as educators always say. And speaking of short term, I see Elizabeth in the chat wrote something like, How do you get to know the audience when we conduct only a single short training? Yeah, that's definitely a big challenge. And one of the ways is to do these kinds of polls. We only did one question, but you know, like if you were to ask, especially like 3 or so questions at the beginning, you could use one of these apps like Kahoot or something if you're in a room together, or if you're online, it's even easier to do a poll. And then people start getting to know each other and you can get lots of information. So if I didn't already have the information from Abby, I might have done a poll like, how many of you teach in this kind of circumstance? Or, you know, what country are you from? Like that you can start to get to know people, or send out a survey ahead of time and ask them some questions online. How do we balance the theory with the practical? Always a difficult balance. But I would say back and forth is really the way. Staying too long in theory, you start losing people. And so case studies are one of the best ways that you can bring theory into the practical. And then also these sort of personalized responses, like take this principle and apply it immediately to something that you know. Elizabeth also in the chat has, how do we address unlearning and relearning? That's a very interesting question. And indeed, there's certain things that you might know that no longer are relevant, and you need to kind of unlearn it. And I would say to that it again is one of these things you just need to sort of explicitly talk about it. And, you know, say, this is an association that's not serving us right now. We need to unlearn it and give examples that separate the two out. Or if you mean unlearning in terms of just forgetting, then that gets more into the territory of repetition and frequent exposure. Helps you relearn something that was kind of recessed in the back of your mind. But again, as a language teacher, I can say if you learn something once, it's easier to bring it back eventually, just through some more exposure. Well, I'm conscious of the time. So I'll mention that on my handout, you have my email, and I hope this was a hopeful lesson to you. And I wonder if Paola or Abby have any final words.
Yes, no, I would just like to say thank you so much, Kara, you know, for such an engaging and insightful session. You really gave us many things to think about, you know, when it comes to how we teach, and I'm sure that our colleagues will apply these principles in their future instruction. I also want to, you know, say thank you to the colleagues for your active participation. You know, our sessions are always enriched by your interventions. You raised many things that we will be addressing more in depth in next sessions. You know, I am taking note of these questions so that way I can pass them on to facilitators and we can, you know, dive into them. If you have further questions for Kara, we have space on our online learning platform, you know, where you can submit questions, but, you know, again, I am keeping note of them and I will, you know, pass them on to the facilitators of the next sessions, especially, you know, for the ones that will fit nicely into those topics, which are all of these questions really. I would also like now to ask you to please take a few moments to provide us with your feedback. Paula shared the link in the chat. It is completely anonymous, so please feel free to be as honest as possible. You know, we use it to improve the upcoming sessions and tailor them to best fit your needs and interests. So really, please take a moment to fill it out. And then we will see you back here on Monday, the 10th of March at 11 a.m. Rome time to explore the ADDIE instructional design cycle. I hope you have a great rest of your day, end of the week, and weekend ahead. So thank you.